Frank Miller presents Why the Acclaimed Comic Book Creator is Reviving Sin City and Ronin. Publisher Dan DiDio says Frank Miller Presents wants to elevate the medium with new stories. Any new comics company faces great pressure and expectation that comes with trying to make a dent in a business dominated by two major players. But when the title of the company is Frank Miller Presents, well, the expectations are just a tad bit higher. The new venture bears the name of one of comics' most celebrated storytellers. Miller is renowned for revitalizing Daredevil and Batman in the 1980s, as well as for indie comics classics like 300 and Give Me Liberty, with artist Dave Gibbons. Together with former DC Comics co-publisher Dan DiDio, who has now signed on as the publisher of FMP, Miller aims to launch a company that empowers and inspires artists and writers to push the medium to new limits. The goal here is to create a vehicle for the readers, run by the talent, that will explore the potentialities of our beloved story in art form, Miller tells. The return of Sin City and Ronin. The company will launch new properties while also returning to two of Miller's most revered creations, Ronin and Sin City. On November, the first issue of Ronin, Book 2 will arrive in comic book shops. Each issue of the bi-monthly series will be released in prestige format, at 48 pages and carrying a $7.99 cover price. Fans have been waiting for years for Miller to revisit his samurai tale. This new series will serve as a continuation of the story Miller introduced in 1983, when Ronin was published by DC Comics. Miller is scripting the series and providing pencil layouts, with Philip Tan handling the finished pencil work and Daniel Henriquez doing the inking. For the first new Sin City stories in more than 20 years, Miller is writing a special one-shot illustrated by legendary Italian artist Milo Manara. That book is called Sin City in Color, because it will detour from the noir series' usual black and white format for a full-color printing. Miller is also writing and illustrating a Western prequel series, called Sin City, 1858. According to DiDio, introducing the Wild West into his noir universe has been on Miller's to-do list for years. Frank's intimately involved in everything going on. The reason why we're doing Ronin is because it's never been exploited before, DiDio says during a phone interview. We feel that there's a lot of areas that Frank has story for. And actually, he's had this story in mind for Ronin, Book 2 since the end of the original series 40 years ago. So this is exciting for him to be able to tell that story because he still carries it with him and he's finally getting it out. Joining the new Ronin series on shelves in November will be the company's first brand new title, Ancient Enemies. The series, also a bi-monthly $7.99 book, is created and designed by DiDio and artist Danilo Beyruth. It centers on an ancient war between alien civilizations that have made their way to Earth. The final conflict ends up being the spark for the birth of new superpowered beings. Even though it's a big high concept, what we're really focused on is the individual characters that rise from the stories themselves, DiDio says. And that's the fun part of it because what we were able to do is a contemporary take on the rise and the advent of superheroes and the superhero world with a much more contemporary tone and understanding of the events of today and how they might play out in the course of these stories. He's had this story in mind for Ronin, Book 2 since the end of the original series 40 years ago. As if to further emphasize the hands-on involvement of the company's founder and namesake, DiDio reveals that Miller also contributed an original idea to the Ancient Enemies storyline, which can exclusively reveal here. Frank created and designed the character the Geek, as well as the backstory for the character, he says. That character will be an integral part of the Ancient Enemies story from the second issue on. They've called us nerds, they've called us geeks, Miller says about his newest creation. Let my geek become your geek because as geeks go, he's one of the good ones. A shared Frank Miller universe? Considering that nearly all aspects of popular culture seem to be embracing the concept of shared universes, is Ancient Enemies meant to be the launch pad for an Miller-verse? There might be something in there that might have a tie to another series, DiDio says. I don't want to give too much away, but there are little Easter eggs in the basis of Ancient Enemies that if you follow them, might take you to other series. That other series could be another of FMP's brand new creations, Pandora, whose release date is still undetermined. Miller devised the idea for the science fiction fantasy hybrid. Star Trek Discovery writers Anthony Maronville and Chris Silvestri will script that series, with Emma Kubert, daughter of comic superstar, and The Dark Knight 3, the master race artist, Andy Kubert, being the latest member of her esteemed family to handle the artwork on a Frank Miller project. DiDio stresses he's less concerned with building a universe than with just creating a comic that hooks new readers. The way the story's being told is pretty similar to the way Darwin Cook told New Frontier, where you're telling this long arching story and the characters that are introduced in that story are the ones that take us through the story. At this point in the conversation, DiDio notes the advantage his new gig has over his old one. When you look at DC and Marvel, I mean you have characters that are 70, 80 years old, and you're trying to contemporize them and tell modern-day stories with them, even though their origins come from a different time period. With Frank Miller Presents, we're creating characters for today in a story that relates to people and situations that are current. When he was at DC Comics, DiDio oversaw Miller's The Dark Knight 3, the Master Race series with Brian Azzarello, Andy Kubert and Klaus Janson, and The Dark Knight Returns, The Golden Child with Raphael Grampa. Now that the roles are reversed and DiDio the writer has Miller the EIC looking over his shoulder, is it a bit weird? You know what, it's very easy to agree with him, DiDio says while laughing. He loves to talk character and story, and honestly, we just sit for hours talking character and story and ideas, because it comes so easily to him. The publisher also notes that he and Miller remain, above all, huge comics fans who spend as much time debating different paper stock as they do discussing plots and characters for their new line of books. That's influencing part of the Frank Miller Presents approach. For example, DiDio says the company will not be following the current industry trend of countless variant covers for individual issues. We're only doing one variant cover per book and that's it, he insists.
Thank you for trusting our news channel about comics and pop culture. Subscribe to Uncanny Collectibles for more information and news.